Now, to the idle resources argument, I have a couple of thoughts. And the first one is derived from, though not the same as, an example that Peter Schiff uses in his book Crash Proof. Schiff gives the example of a restaurant owner who happens to live near where the circus comes to town. And the circus comes to town, and so all the clowns and the trapeze artists and the circus patrons all start going to his restaurant in great numbers. Now, this is not the brightest restaurant owner in the world. He doesn't notice that a lot of these patrons are, in fact, wearing clown suits. So he thinks he's just enjoying an incredible upsurge in demand for his food. So in response to this demand, he builds a new addition onto his facility, or he builds a new location. And then the circus leaves town. And then he realizes he's not really as much in demand as he thought. This was sort of an artificially sort of circus-induced boom that he was enjoying. Well, now the question becomes, yes, now he's got idle resources. That addition is idle. Those additional employees he's hired are idle. That additional location is idle. Should we want to have a stimulus package to stimulate these resources back into use? No! They shouldn't have been built in the first place. It was a miscalculation based on an artificial boom. It's a waste of resources that needs to be liquidated. Those waiters and waitresses standing around all day not getting any tips and working for whatever the wage is, they should be redeployed elsewhere. I mean, in fact, you'd be doing them a favor, basically. They would want that. They need to be moved out of that. They are idle resources, those individuals, but we don't want to stimulate them back into activity because we would be wasting the scarce resources of society. We should instead be reallocating those resources where the market demands them, where we're producing things that are urgently demanded by consumers. Now, secondly, I would ask sort of the question, why are the idle resources idle? This is the question that's never asked. We've got idle resources. Let's go get them to work again. Well, what made all these resources? Why all of a sudden, why have all these businessmen who are selected by the market for their skill at anticipating consumer demand, why have they done such a rotten job that they're all saddled with idle resources, that it's not even worth putting them to work? Why does that happen? Well, as Ayn Rand would say, blank out. There's no answer given to that. But the Austrians would say the reason you have all these idle resources in the first place was because of the central bank-induced boom that misdirected capital into projects that would not be sustainable in the long term. And now entrepreneurs are realizing their error. So we don't necessarily, again, want to stimulate these idle resources into activity. We want to redeploy them. We want a restructuring of the economy. But instead, you get a stimulus package. It distorts this process. It makes it harder for the market to figure out what's real demand, what's phony demand, what's sustainable, what isn't. It keeps, let's say, construction companies at work, doing government make work, when these companies themselves and their employees need to be either taken out of business and then their employees need to be redeployed elsewhere in the economy. So again, the stimulus only discombobulates the market further and makes it harder for market actors to make these adjustments. And then ultimately, my last little point would be, just to take one example from the stimulus package, apparently 2 million Americans are going to get their homes weatherized under the stimulus package. Now, this is supposed to, again, stimulate idle resources back into activity. Well, okay, so we've got some resources in the financial sector that are idle. We've got some car production that's idle. We got a lot of various types of unemployment. Do we have enough unemployed weatherizers in the country that a stimulus package could put them and only them back to work? Well, of course not. What in fact will happen is that you'll be drawing employment from private employers who were producing good things for consumers, but now they'll be bid away from private actors. And in fact, when the economy starts turning around, private actors will find themselves having to bid against the government for laborers who are doing things that aren't even in demand. So there's no way, even if any of this stuff made sense, to tailor the package so that the exactly correct kinds of capital and kinds of employment are specifically drawn back into use. Even if the theoretical objections weren't there, the practical obstacles are impossible to meet, in effect.